I am Garrett Thompson, 34 years old, and the lake house my grandfather left me was my sanctuary, my future, my everything. When my parents casually announced over dinner they had sold it to fund my brother Ethan's extravagant wedding, everyone expected me to explode. Instead, I smiled and stayed quiet. Their relief was palpable, thinking I had accepted their betrayal. They had no idea I was calculating exactly how to dismantle their fantasy world without raising my voice. Before I share what happened next, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe to see how I tore their perfect family illusion apart and walked away without looking back. Growing up in suburban Boston, the differences between my brother Ethan and me were apparent from the beginning. 3 years younger than me, Ethan was the golden child, creative, charming, and always the center of attention. I was the responsible one, the planner, the steady presence. This natural division of roles might have been harmless if not for how dramatically our parents reinforced it at every turn. Our father Richard worked as a bank manager, a practical man who valued appearances and status above all else. Our mother Diane had been an elementary school teacher before becoming a full-time mother, and she approached parenting with clear favorites from day one. They never tried to hide that Ethan held a special place in their hearts that I somehow could never reach. The modest two-story colonial where we grew up had 4 bedrooms, but you could tell which child mattered more by the way my parents invested in our spaces. When Ethan developed an interest in music at 12, they converted our shared playroom into a mini studio for him, complete with acoustic treatment and equipment that gathered dust within months when he lost interest. Meanwhile, I saved for 2 summers to buy a decent desk for my homework. My saving grace was my grandfather Harold, my father's father, who seemed to see me clearly when no one else did. A retired carpenter, with calloused hands and endless patience, he owned a small lake house in New Hampshire that became my true home. The property wasn't fancy. A 3-bedroom cabin with weathered cedar siding, a stone fireplace, and a small dock that stretched 20 feet into the crystal-clear water. What made it special was the peace it offered and the unconditional acceptance I felt there. From the age of 9, I spent every summer at that lake house learning to fish, build, and fix things. Attention to detail will serve you well. Garrett Grandpa would say, showing me how to sand wood until it was smooth as glass. Most people quit right before something gets good. Those lessons stuck with me while Ethan bounced between interests back home, receiving endless praise for minimal effort. By 15, I was working summer jobs, mowing lawns, stocking, grocery shelves, saving every dollar. My parents would comment, "Garrett is so serious," like it was a character flaw, while Ethan received regular increases to his allowance despite never completing basic chores. When I made honor roll consistently throughout high school, it was met with a casual "good job." When Ethan brought home a single B+ among C's, my parents took the family out for a celebration dinner. The pattern continued through college. I earned a partial scholarship to MIT for engineering, but paid the remainder through student loans and part-time jobs. Meanwhile, my parents fully funded Ethan's education at 3 different colleges as he switched majors repeatedly, never completing a degree. Ethan is finding himself, they would explain to relatives. Garrett always knew what he wanted. It was true, I did know what I wanted. I wanted recognition for my hard work. I wanted parents who didn't treat basic responsibility like an afterthought. Most of all, I wanted the peaceful clarity I only found at the lake house with my grandfather. As Grandpa Harold aged, his health began to decline. During his final 2 years, I arranged my work schedule to spend every other weekend at the lake house, helping with maintenance he could no longer manage. We would sit on the dock at sunset, talking about life values, and sometimes the family dynamics neither of us mentioned directly, but both understood perfectly. Property is just things, he told me once, but a place that helps you think clearly, that's worth holding on to. Then he added something that only made sense later. I've been watching who values what in this family for a long time, Garrett. I've made my decisions accordingly. When he passed away 3 years ago, the funeral was somber but brief, exactly as he would have wanted. I delivered the eulogy while my father stared stoically ahead, and my mother comforted a loudly sobbing Ethan, who had visited his grandfather perhaps twice in the final year. A week later, we gathered in Warren Fletcher's law office, an elderly attorney who had been my grandfather's friend for 40 years. As Warren read the will, the room grew tense. Grandpa had divided his modest savings between my father and his sister Linda. His tools went to me. Some family heirlooms were distributed among relatives. Then came the lake house. And to my grandson Garrett, who understands the value of quiet waters and who has shown through his actions that he will preserve what matters, I leave my lake house property in New Hampshire, with all structures and land therein. The silence was deafening. My father's face flushed red. My mother's mouth formed a tight line. Ethan looked confused, then dismissive. No one congratulated me. The unspoken expectation had always been that the lake house would go to my father or at least be split between both grandchildren. Warren later showed me a letter Grandpa had left explaining his decision. "Richard and Diane will provide for Ethan, as they always have," he wrote. "You need this place, and this place needs you." For 3 years, the lake house remained my sanctuary. I renovated the bathroom, replaced the dock, and spent countless weekends there clearing my head from the pressures of my increasingly successful career in software engineering. It was the one place I felt connected to someone who had truly seen me, and I had plans to eventually live there full-time, perhaps starting a family of my own one day. Little did I know that the entire time my parents viewed my inheritance as a temporary inconvenience, an asset they believed should have been theirs, just waiting for the right moment to reclaim it. 8 months ago, my brother Ethan called with excitement. I had rarely heard from him. "Garrett, I met someone. She is absolutely amazing. You have to meet her." Her name was Isabella Montgomery, a 29-year-old social media influencer with 50,000 followers who documented her luxurious lifestyle and beauty routines. She came from old money. Her father owned a chain of high-end car dealerships across New England, and her mother was from a banking family with a summer home in Martha's Vineyard. Within weeks of their first date, Isabella became a fixture at my parents' house, where Ethan had moved back in after his latest business venture, an organic juice bar, had folded the previous year. Their relationship progressed at warp speed, driven largely by Isabella's precisely planned social media timeline. Their first vacation, first major gift exchange, and eventually proposal were all meticulously photographed, filtered, and shared with her growing audience. Ethan, always desperate for validation, seemed intoxicated by the attention and the entry into Isabella's privileged world. The first time I met her was at my parents' house for Sunday dinner. She arrived wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, air-kissing everyone and calling my mother Dee within minutes of meeting her. When she learned I worked in software engineering, her eyes momentarily registered interest. "Do you work with any influencers on app development?" she asked. "I have this amazing concept for a platform that would revolutionize the affiliate marketing space." When I explained that I specialized in security systems rather than social media applications, her interest evaporated immediately. Later, when my lake house came up in conversation, her response was telling. "A cabin in New Hampshire. How rustic," she said, somehow making rustic sound like primitive. Ethan mentioned a family property, but I pictured something on the Cape. After just 5 months of dating, Ethan proposed with a ring that I later learned he had put on 3 different credit cards. The engagement party was held at Isabella's parents' sprawling colonial mansion, complete with catering staff, a string quartet, and a photographer documenting every moment. I stood awkwardly in a corner, nursing a single glass of champagne, watching my parents beam with pride as they were introduced to Isabella's family's social circle. "Your brother has really found his match," my mother whispered to me at one point. "The Montgomerys know everyone who matters in Boston." It was at this party that I first overheard discussions about wedding plans, specifically the budget. "Obviously, we cannot do it for less than $130,000. Isabella was saying to her mother and mine, who looked slightly pale at the figure. The Crawfords spent $200,000 on Victoria's wedding last year, and honestly, it was nice, but nothing spectacular. My father joined the conversation, his chest puffed slightly. "Well, the Thompson family will certainly make sure this is a wedding to remember." I wondered silently where they thought this money would come from. My father's retirement account was comfortable but not extravagant, and they had already helped fund several of Ethan's failed business attempts. Over the next few weeks, the wedding planning consumed all family conversations. Isabella had demands that grew increasingly elaborate. A destination, bachelor, and bachelorette weekend in Miami. a designer dress from New York, a specific historic venue that was booked 18 months in advance, but that she insisted they encrest. Could get through her connections. Ethan, meanwhile, was attempting to launch yet another business, a social media consulting agency trading on Isabella's moderate fame. He approached me about investing, which I politely declined. His face hardened momentarily, before he recovered with his characteristic charm. "No worries, bro. Mom and Dad are helping with seed money. Just thought I would keep it in the family." The first hint of what was coming occurred at a family dinner 2 months after the engagement. Isabella was showing photos of wedding venues on her phone when she casually remarked, "Of course weddings like this are investments in the future. Sometimes families need to liquidate assets to secure the next generation's happiness." My mother nodded enthusiastically, while my father looked thoughtfully at me. The conversation quickly shifted, but the seed had been planted. A week later, Ethan called me to catch up something he rarely did, without wanting something. After 20 minutes of surface-level conversation, he got to his point. "So, Isabella and I were talking about family properties," he began casually. "That lake house just sits empty most of the time, right? Have you ever had it appraised?" "It is not empty most of the time," I corrected him. "I am there almost every weekend." Sure, he backpedaled. "I just mean it is a lot of maintenance for one person, and property values in that area have skyrocketed since COVID." When I did not respond, he continued, "Isabella, and I might want to start a family soon after the wedding. A place like that would be great for kids." "Grandpa left it to me for a reason, Ethan," I said firmly. "I have my own plans for it." He laughed as if I had made a joke. "Come on, Garrett. You have always been the financially responsible one. You could sell it, make a great return, and buy something that makes more sense for your lifestyle. You live in the city, work 60 hours a week. When do you even have time to enjoy it?" I ended the conversation shortly after, but an unsettling feeling remained. Something was happening behind the scenes, and I was not being included in the discussion. Still, I never imagined how far they would go, until the night everything changed. The invitation came via text from my mother. "Family dinner this Friday at 7. Important matters to discuss. Please make sure to attend." The formal tone was unusual. Our family communications were typically casual, often last minute. Something felt off, but I dismissed my unease as paranoia. I arrived at my parents' colonial home in Lexington precisely at 7, bringing a bottle of wine as was my custom. The dining room was set with the good china, another red flag, as this was typically reserved for holidays and special announcements. Ethan and Isabella were already seated, Isabella scrolling through her phone while Ethan fidgeted with his napkin. My parents emerged from the kitchen with unusually bright smiles. "Garrett, right on time. As always," my father boomed, clapping me on the shoulder with forced joviality. Dinner was a strange affair. My mother had prepared my childhood favorite meal pot roast with root vegetables, something she had not done in years. The conversation remained stubbornly superficial. The weather, a recent sports victory, Isabella's growing social media following. No one mentioned the important matters referenced in the invitation. It was not until dessert apple pie with vanilla ice cream that my father cleared his throat and set down his spoon with a clink against fine china. "Garrett, we have made some family decisions that we need to discuss with you." He began, exchanging a quick glance with my mother. "As you know, Ethan and Isabella's wedding plans have been coming together beautifully, but there have been some financial considerations." My mother jumped in, her voice overly bright. "The venue Isabella has her heart set on just became available for June due to a cancellation. It is perfect, but required an immediate deposit." My father nodded. "And of course there are many other expenses. The catering alone is quite an investment." I looked between them, waiting for the point. Isabella had stopped scrolling through her phone and was watching me with barely concealed anticipation. "What we are trying to say," my father continued, his banker voice taking over, "is that we have had to make some asset allocation decisions to ensure Ethan and Isabella have the wedding they deserve and a solid financial foundation for their fallible future." My mother reached across the table to pat my hand. "We know you will understand, dear. You have always been our practical one." The room seemed to tilt slightly as my father delivered the blow. "We have sold the lake house." For a moment I thought I had misheard. "You've what?" We sold the lake house, my father repeated more firmly. The closing was last week. We got an excellent price. The market is very strong right now. I stared at him, unable to process his words. The lake house is mine. Grandpa left it to me in his will. You cannot sell what you do not own. My father shifted uncomfortably but maintained his authoritative tone. Well, that is not entirely accurate. Your grandfather placed the property in a family trust with your mother and me as secondary trustees. There was a provision allowing for liquidation of assets if deemed necessary for family welfare. The room went silent as I absorbed this information. My grandfather had never mentioned such an arrangement, nor had Warren Fletcher when reading the will. This felt wrong, impossible. We consulted with Stanley Green, my father added, referring to his own attorney rather than my grandfather's. He confirmed our legal standing. My mother squeezed my hand again, her voice honey-sweet. Darling, you can always buy another property when you are ready to settle down. This was the sensible choice for the family right now. Ethan finally spoke, not quite meeting my eyes. The funds are being allocated really responsibly, bro. The wedding venue and catering will take $130,000. Then there is the honeymoon package to Bali for 2 weeks, about $20,000 for that, and the remainder is seed investment for my new digital marketing firm that will set Isabella and me up for success. Isabella nodded enthusiastically. My father is connecting us with all his business associates. It is going to be amazing. She turned to my mother. We should start finalizing the floral arrangements this week. I am thinking white orchids and roses, with crystal accents to match the venue's chandeliers. I sat motionless, feeling a cold numbness spread through my chest as they continued discussing wedding details as if they had not just announced the theft of my inheritance. The property I had maintained, improved, and planned my future around had been sold without my knowledge or consent. How long have you been planning this? I asked quietly, interrupting Isabella's monologue about place settings. My parents exchanged another glance. We have been considering options for a while, my father admitted. The opportunity with the wedding venue becoming available just accelerated the timeline. You're financially stable, Garrett, my mother added. Your career is thriving. Ethan needs this boost to get established. It is our responsibility as parents to help where help is needed most. The subtext was clear. I had always been self-sufficient, so I deserved less. Ethan had always needed support, so he deserved more, even if that meant taking what was rightfully mine. You never used it much anyway, Ethan said with a dismissive wave. It was always needing repairs and maintenance. The new owners are probably going to tear it down and build something modern. Something inside me wanted to scream, to flip the table, to make them understand what they had done. The lake house was not just property. It was my connection to the one person who had valued me, my refuge from a family that never saw me clearly. My planned future home. Instead, I took a deep breath and made a split-second decision that surprised even me. I smiled. I see, I said calmly. Well, I suppose what is done is done. The tension in the room dissipated, instantly replaced by visible relief. My father nodded approvingly. I knew you would understand. You have always been the reasonable one. May I ask how much it sold for? I inquired politely. $420,000, my father replied, clearly pleased with himself. 15% above asking price. The market is incredibly hot right now. I nodded thoughtfully. That is a good price. Well, if you will excuse me, I need some time to process this news. Thank you for dinner, Mom. Congratulations on the wedding plans, Ethan and Isabella. They seemed startled by my calm acceptance and quick departure. As I stood to leave, my mother looked concerned for the first time. Are you sure you are all right, dear? We can discuss this more if you need to. I am fine, I assured her with another smile. Just tired from a long week at work. I will call you soon. I drove home in a state of shock, the reality of what had happened, not fully registering until I walked into my empty apartment. Only then, with no witnesses, did I allow the mask to drop. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. They had not just taken property, they had dismissed my feelings, my inheritance, and my place in the family as insignificant compared to Ethan's wants. I sat on my couch until dawn, moving through waves of grief, rage, and disbelief. By morning, one thing had become clear. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment by my family. This was the culmination of a lifetime pattern now impossible to ignore. And it would require a response they would never forget. Sleep eluded me that night as memories of the lake house cycled through my mind, teaching myself to swim off the dock at age 10, helping Grandpa replace rotting boards on the porch, sitting by the fireplace during thunderstorms, the quiet mornings with coffee and mist rising off the water. Each memory felt like something tangible being torn away. At 6 a.m., I called Marcus, my best friend since college. "Can you come over?" Something happened. Marcus arrived 30 minutes later, with coffee and concern etched on his face. As I recounted the previous night's events, his expression shifted from shock to outrage. "They did. What, without even consulting you? That is straight-up theft, Garrett. We should call the police." I shook my head. If what my father said about the trust is true, they found a legal loophole. Unethical as hell, but possibly legal. Marcus paced my living room more angry than I had ever seen him. Then confront them. Scream at them. Tell the entire extended family what they did. Show up at that ridiculous wedding, and tell everyone there how it was funded. That is what they expect me to do. I replied, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. They are prepared for anger, for a scene. They have their justifications ready. Fighting emotionally plays into their hands. They will paint me as the unreasonable one, the selfish son, who would not help his brother. Marcus stopped pacing. "So, what are you going to do?" "Something cold, calculated, and final," I said. "Something that makes it absolutely clear what this decision has cost them. But I need time to think." Later that day, I called Rachel, my girlfriend of 2 years. Unlike Marcus's righteous anger, Rachel offered the measured perspective of her training as a psychologist. "What they did was a profound betrayal," she said, as we walked through a park near my apartment. "But your reaction, that instinct to stay calm and not give them the emotional explosion they expected, that was brilliant. It confused them. It took away their prepared script." "I still feel like I am in shock," I admitted. "I cannot believe they would do this." This kind of family dynamic, the golden child, and the responsible one, it creates deep patterns, she explained. Your parents have spent a lifetime justifying their favoritism. In their minds, taking from you to give to Ethan probably feels completely reasonable. The next day, I took a personal day from work and drove to New Hampshire. According to my father, I had 2 weeks before the new owners would take possession. The 3-hour drive gave me time to process my thoughts, to move beyond the initial shock into something more focused. The lake house looked exactly as I had left it 2 weeks prior. The afternoon sun reflected off the water, the old dock stretched into the lake, and the cedar siding glowed warm and inviting. I used my key for what would be one of the last times. Inside, I moved from room to room, documenting everything with photos. The stone fireplace where Grandpa and I had talked late into the night. The kitchen table where he had taught me to play chess. The back bedroom where I had first read Hemingway and London. I collected the few personal items my parents had generously allowed me to keep: some books, Grandpa's fishing gear, and a few family photos. As I was loading these into my car, Martha Jennings, an 80-year-old neighbor who had known my grandfather for decades, walked over from her nearby cottage. "Garrett, I have not seen you in a couple weeks. Getting ready for summer." I explained the situation as briefly as possible, not wanting to burden her with family drama. "Sold. That cannot be right," she said, genuinely confused. "Your parents were here with some people back in February, showing them around. I assumed they were friends visiting." February, months before Ethan had even proposed to Isabella. The timeline suddenly shifted in my mind, revealing an even more calculated betrayal than I had initially understood. They had been planning this long before the wedding was even on the horizon. That evening, I called my Aunt Linda, my father's sister, who had always seen the family dynamics more clearly than most. "I wish I could say I am surprised," she said, after I explained what happened. "Richard has always enabled Ethan at your expense. Did you know they paid off his credit card debt twice in the last 5 years? Tens of thousands of dollars? Meanwhile, they boast to everyone about how you made it on your own." I had no idea it was that much, I admitted. "The lake house has been a point of contention since your grandfather's will was read," Linda continued. Richard believed your grandfather would change his mind that the property would eventually come to him. When that did not happen, he started looking for ways around it almost immediately. The next morning, I consulted with a new attorney, a sharp woman specializing in estate litigation. After reviewing the trust documents my father had reluctantly emailed me, she confirmed my suspicions. They exploited a technical provision, but it is questionable whether their interpretation would hold up in court, she explained. The trust specified liquidation for family welfare, which typically means medical emergencies or financial hardship, not luxury weddings. However, litigation would be expensive and time-consuming, with no guarantee of success. With legal options limited, I began developing a different kind of response, one that would make the emotional cost of their actions undeniably clear. Over the next week, I methodically prepared, focusing on 3 key areas. First, financial separation. I removed my parents as contingent beneficiaries from my life insurance and 401 Kelvin, redirecting those designations to a scholarship fund I established in my grandfather's name. I updated my will, explicitly excluding my immediate family. I closed the joint savings account I had maintained with my parents since childhood, a small account but symbolic. Second, documentation. I created a comprehensive record of the family's financial history, including my self-sufficiency and the constant support Ethan had received. Aunt Linda provided figures I had never known about, including my parents' payment of Ethan's rent for years while claiming he was making it on his own. I gathered photos of the lake house, copies of my grandfather's will, and the improvements I had made to the property over 3 years. Third, preparation for a final confrontation that would not involve shouting or emotional pleas, but rather a clear, factual presentation of what had been done and its permanent consequences. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Rachel asked as we reviewed my plan. "Once you do this, there may be no going back." "They have already decided what our relationship is worth," I replied. $420,000 divided between a one-day party and another of Ethan's doomed business ventures. I am just acknowledging their valuation. As the days passed, my initial shock transformed into a cold clarity. I had spent a lifetime accommodating their favoritism, making excuses for their behavior, maintaining relationships, despite the constant imbalance. The lake house betrayal had finally shown me the truth. I was not a son to them, in the same way Ethan was. I was a resource to be tapped, when convenient, an afterthought in family decisions. 2 weeks after the dinner announcement, the pre-wedding celebration was scheduled at Rosetta's, one of Boston's most expensive restaurants. All extended family would be there, along with close friends and Isabella's large social circle. I had initially considered not attending, but now it figured centrally in my plan. It would be the perfect setting for a calm, factual, and final response to what they had done. The night before the event, I stood in my apartment, looking at the last photo taken of my grandfather and me at the lake house, sitting on the dock at sunset, fishing rods beside us, both smiling at the simple pleasure of each other's company. "I think you saw this coming long before I did, Grandpa," I said to the photo. "I am sorry I could not protect what you entrusted to me, but I can still honor how you lived with integrity, with clarity about what matters, and with the courage to protect your own peace." I carefully placed the photo in a custom album I had created, the centerpiece of what would be my final communication with the family that had decided I was worth less than a wedding venue and a honeymoon in Bali. Rosetta's restaurant glowed with warm amber lighting, crystal chandeliers, and the quiet hum of Boston's elite, enjoying $20 cocktails and $100 entrees. The private room reserved for Ethan and Isabella's pre-wedding celebration was decorated with cream and gold accents, fresh flower arrangements on every table, and a professional photographer capturing candid moments for Candid Moments, Isabella's social media. I arrived precisely on time, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that I had purchased specifically for this occasion. The small wrapped box tucked under my arm contained the album I had carefully assembled over the past 2 weeks. As I entered, my mother rushed over, visibly relieved to see me. "Garrett, I was beginning to worry you would not come. You have barely responded to my texts." "I said I would be here," I replied with a polite smile. "I have been busy with work." The room was already filled with relatives, friends, and Isabella's substantial entourage. My father stood by the bar, deep in conversation with Isabella's father, a tall, imposing man with the confident posture of someone who had never worried about money. Ethan circulated through the crowd, his arm around Isabella's waist, both laughing a bit too loudly at every comment from their guests. Aunt Linda caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle nod. She and her son, Jared, were among the few who knew what had happened with the lake house, and the only family members aware of what I planned to do tonight. The evening progressed through predictable stages: cocktails, seating for dinner, speeches from the parents, praising the couple. My father spoke at length about family legacy and supporting the next generation, words that now carried a bitter irony. Throughout dinner, I remained quiet but pleasant, responding to questions about my work, with brief answers that gave nothing away. After the main course, Isabella's father announced they had upgraded several aspects of the wedding, including a last-minute booking of a popular band that typically performed at celebrity events. "We want to thank Richard and Diane for their extraordinary generosity in making this possible," he said, raising his glass toward my parents. "Their contribution has truly elevated this celebration to the level our children deserve." My mother beamed while my father nodded graciously, both accepting praise for their generosity with my inheritance. I took a slow sip of water and waited. When dessert was served, Ethan stood and called for attention. "We also have some exciting news about our future plans," he announced, his arm around Isabella. "Thanks to my parents' incredible support, we have secured an amazing office space in Back Bay for our new digital marketing agency. We move in right after the honeymoon." Applause rippled through the room. Isabella added, "And we are already in talks about a waterfront condo in the Seaport district. Everything is falling into place perfectly." More applause, more congratulations. The lake house money was already being allocated to lifestyle upgrades, far beyond what Ethan's non-existent business could possibly support. As coffee was served, Isabella's mother suggested it was time for family toasts. Isabella's brother went first, followed by her cousins. Then all eyes turned to me. "Garrett, would you like to say a few words?" As the brother of the groom, my mother prompted. I stood slowly, straightening my tie. The room quieted as I cleared my throat. Family is an interesting concept. I began, my voice steady. It is supposed to represent unconditional support, mutual respect, and shared values. I paused, looking around the room at the expectant faces. Ethan and I have traveled different paths in life. He has always been the creative one, the dreamer. I have always been the practical one, the planner. Our parents have supported us in different ways. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while my mother maintained her fixed smile. I want to acknowledge the extraordinary lengths our parents have gone to in order to ensure Ethan and Isabella have everything they want for their special day and their future together. Relieved nods around the table. They thought this was a conventional toast. In that spirit, I have brought a special gift that I think captures this moment perfectly. I placed the wrapped box on the table and slid it toward Ethan. "This is for all of you, Ethan, Isabella, Mom, and Dad. A keepsake to remember this time by." Ethan unwrapped the package with Isabella leaning eagerly over his shoulder. Their expressions shifted from curiosity to confusion as they revealed the leather-bound photo album titled Simply Legacy. "Open it," I suggested quietly. My father reached for the album, flipping open the cover. The first page contained a photo of my grandfather standing proudly in front of the lake house the day he purchased it in 1978. The second page showed him teaching me to fish off the dock when I was 8 years old. The third page featured the letter he had written, explaining why he had left the property specifically to me, to my grandson, Garrett, who values this place as I do, who has shown the character and responsibility to preserve it, who finds peace in its quiet waters, as I always have. As my father continued turning pages, the album revealed the story of the lake house through the years' improvements I had made. Holidays celebrated their quiet moments captured in photographs. Then came documentation of the recent betrayal, copies of property records. The trust document with the exploited provision highlighted a timeline showing they had begun showing the property to potential buyers months before Ethan's place engagement. The final section contained financial records, a detailed accounting of all the support my parents had provided Ethan over the years, totaling over $300,000, before the lake house sale contrasted with what I had received. Essentially nothing beyond basic childhood care. End of AT. The last page held a simple statement: "This album represents what our family relationship was worth, $420,000. I accept your valuation." Silence fell over the table as the album made its way around. Isabella's parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. Extended family members looked away awkwardly. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. I remained standing calm and composed. "I have one more thing to add," I said, placing a sealed envelope on the table. "This contains documentation of several decisions I have made in response to recent events. I address my father directly. You will find that I have legally changed my name, removing Thompson entirely. I am now simply Garrett Harold, taking my grandfather's first name as my last." My mother gasped, but I continued without pause. "You will also find that I have updated my will to exclude all of you, redirecting my assets to a scholarship fund established in my grandfather's name for engineering students who, like me, receive no family financial support." I turned to Ethan. "I have returned all family heirlooms except Grandpa's watch, which he specifically gave to me on my 18th birthday. Those items are being delivered to the house tomorrow." Finally, I looked at my parents again. I want to be absolutely clear, this is not an emotional reaction that will fade with time. This is not a negotiating tactic. This is my calm, considered response to what you have done. You made a choice about what our relationship was worth, and I am simply acknowledging that valuation. My father's face had turned a deep red. "Now see here, Garrett. You are blowing this completely out of proportion. The lake house was a family asset." "It was not," I interrupted calmly. "It was my inheritance left specifically to me by someone who saw me clearly. You found a legal technicality to take it and redistribute it according to your preferences, as you have always done. I am not disputing your legal right to have done so. I am simply responding to what that action revealed about how you value me." My mother began to cry, reaching toward me. "Darling, please. We never meant to hurt you. We just thought, since you are so successful, and Ethan needs—" "I know exactly what you thought," I said gently. "You thought I would accept it, as I have accepted every other inequity. You thought I would continue to be the reasonable one, the one who makes sacrifices, the one who understands. But some things cannot be understood or accepted." Ethan finally spoke, his voice uncertain. "Bro, come on. It is just a house. We are family." I looked at him directly. "No, Ethan. It was never just a house. It was the one place where I was valued for exactly who I am. It was my connection to the one family member who saw me clearly. It was my past and my planned future. And you all decided it was worth exactly $420,000 to be spent on a one-day party and another business venture that will likely fail like all the others." Isabella, uncomfortable with the attention being diverted from her special evening, attempted to redirect. "I think everyone is getting too emotional. The wedding is going to be absolutely amazing, and that is what we should be focusing on." Her tone, dismissive, entitled "oblivious," crystallized everything about the situation perfectly. I smiled at her. "Congratulations on your wedding, Isabella. I wish you both happiness." I turned back to my parents, who were now sitting in stunned silence. "I forgive you for what you have done, because holding on to anger would only hurt me further. But forgiveness does not mean maintaining relationships that cause harm. I will not be attending the wedding or any future family events. My decision is final." I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair and addressed the room one last time. "Thank you all for your attention. Please enjoy the rest of your evening." As I walked toward the exit, I heard my mother call my name, her voice breaking. My father began a blustering defense about ungrateful children. Ethan sat frozen, perhaps finally understanding the permanence of what had happened. Aunt Linda caught my eye and gave me a small nod of respect. Isabella's voice cut through the chaos. "Well, that was dramatic. Can we please get back to discussing the wedding?" I stepped out into the cool Boston evening, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The weight of unmet expectations of trying to earn equal standing in a family where the scales had always been tipped lifted from my shoulders. I had not raised my voice. I had not made scenes or threats. I had simply stated facts and established boundaries that should have been in place long ago. As I drove away from the restaurant, I realized I was not driving toward my apartment, but in the direction of New Hampshire, toward the lake house I would visit one final time before the new owners took possession. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter 1 without the burden of seeking approval from people who had consistently shown they valued me less. The day after the confrontation at Rosetta's, I executed the final pieces of my plan. I changed my phone number, forwarded all emails from my family to a separate folder, and began the process of moving to a new apartment across town. Each action felt like cutting a thread that had bound me to patterns that no longer served me. The flood of messages began almost immediately. My mother sent tearful voicemails before my number change. "Please call us. We had no idea how much the lake house meant to you. We can figure something out." My father's messages oscillated between anger, "This childish behavior is beneath you," and grudging negotiation. "Perhaps we can discuss some form of compensation." Ethan's texts revealed his gradually dawning realization. "Dude, you cannot just walk away from family evolved into. Is this really it? 29 years, as brothers just over Isabella, predictably sent a single message, 'Your drama is stressing Ethan out and affecting our wedding planning. You need to fix this.'" I read each message once, then filed them away without responding. Through Aunt Linda, I learned that my parents had shown up at my workplace the following Monday, only to be turned away by building security because I had removed them from my visitor list. "They are in complete shock," Linda reported during our weekly phone calls. "I do not think they ever imagined you would actually follow through with cutting contact. Richard keeps saying you will come to your senses before the wedding." The wedding proceeded as planned 3 weeks later. I spent that day hiking a mountain trail in Vermont, my phone turned off, finding peace in the solitude. Linda called the next day with a report that surprised even her. "The wedding was beautiful but strained," she said. "Several relatives asked about your absence. Your parents gave vague answers about you being unable to attend due to prior commitments, but everyone who knew about the lake house situation saw through it." Isabella's family noticed the tension too. Over the following weeks, an unexpected development emerged. Extended family members and longtime friends began reaching out to me directly, many expressing support after learning what had happened. I always saw how differently they treated you, and Ethan, my cousin Jared, told me over coffee. But the lake house situation crosses a line that cannot be uncrossed. My mother's sister, who had always maintained careful neutrality in family matters, called me for the first time in years. "Your mother is devastated, but I told her she needs to recognize her part in this. You do not betray someone's trust and then dictate how they should respond." 6 weeks after I changed apartments, I received an email from Warren Fletcher, my grandfather's attorney. The new owners of the lake house had found additional items in the attic: old journals, photographs, and fishing equipment that had belonged to my grandfather. "They asked me to contact you," Warren wrote. "They were troubled to learn how the property changed hands and wanted you to have these personal effects. They also mentioned you would be welcome to visit the dock and waterfront any time should you wish to." That unexpected kindness from strangers brought the first tears I had allowed myself since the night of the betrayal. I arranged to collect the items the following weekend, and found myself sitting on the familiar dock with the new owners, a young couple with 2 small children, who planned to preserve much of the cabin's original character. "Your grandfather built something special here," the husband told me. "We can feel it in the place. We will honor that." As summer turned to fall, I began building new traditions and connections. Marcus and Rachel became my chosen family, joining me for holidays and regular dinner gatherings. I channeled my energy into my career, earning a promotion to senior security architect at my firm. I began volunteering with a mentorship program for engineering students without family support, the same group that would benefit from the scholarship fund I had established. The first Thanksgiving away from family was both difficult and liberating. Rachel hosted at her apartment, inviting several friends who also had complicated family situations. We cooked together, played board games, and created a day filled with genuine warmth rather than obligatory tradition. As Christmas approached, Aunt Linda reported that my absence was becoming a painful reality for my parents. "Your mother wanted to send you gifts, but I advised against it," she said. "I told her she needs to respect your boundaries if there is ever to be any healing." In January, nearly 6 months after the confrontation, I ran into Ethan unexpectedly at a coffee shop in Cambridge. He looked tired, the confident swagger replaced by slumped shoulders and dark circles under his eyes. "Garrett," he said, stopping abruptly when he saw me, "I did not expect to see you here." "Hello, Ethan," I replied calmly. "How are you?" "I have been better," he admitted, glancing down at his coffee. "The business is challenging. The wedding expenses were more than we anticipated. Isabella is disappointed with how things are going." I nodded but offered no solutions, no advice, no financial lifeline. After an awkward pause, he asked, "How have you been?" "I am doing well," I said simply, "working on some interesting projects." He shifted uncomfortably. "Mom asks about you all the time. Dad too, though he would never admit it." "I hope they are well," I replied neutrally. "Can we ever fix this?" he asked suddenly, his voice smaller than I had ever heard it. I considered my answer carefully. "This is not something for me to fix, Ethan. What happened was a choice made by you and our parents. The consequences of that choice are not my responsibility to remedy." He nodded slowly. "I get it now. I did not then, but I do now." After another pause, he added, "Isabella and I are having problems. She is not who I thought she was when things get difficult." "I am sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it despite everything. We parted without plans to meet again, but something in his demeanor suggested a dawning awareness that had never been there before. The following week, Aunt Linda called with news Ethan's business has failed completely. Isabella is threatening to move back to her parents' house unless he figures something out. "Your parents have already dipped into their retirement accounts to help them." "That is unfortunate," I replied, feeling a complex mix of vindication and genuine sadness for the inevitable crash that had been coming long before the lake house situation. In March, my father had a minor heart attack, stress-related, according to Linda. I sent a card to the hospital, but maintained my distance. The health scare prompted my mother to send a lengthy email, her first direct communication, that did not ask for reconciliation, but instead offered a limited acknowledgement. "I realize now that we have taken your stability for granted," she wrote. "We have expected you to understand and support our decisions regarding Ethan without considering your feelings or rights. I cannot change what happened with the lake house, but I am truly sorry for the pain we caused." It was not a complete reckoning, but it was more self-awareness than she had ever expressed before. I did not respond immediately, needing time to process whether this represented genuine growth or another attempt at drawing me back into old patterns. As the 1-year mark of the lake house sale approached, I found myself reflecting on the journey. The acute pain had subsided, replaced by occasional melancholy, but also by a profound sense of peace. The boundaries I had established had forced my family to confront patterns they had maintained for decades. While our relationship remained severed, their understanding of their role in that outcome had evolved. I had changed too. The person who had silently accepted unequal treatment for a lifetime was gone. In his place stood someone who valued himself enough to walk away from relationships that caused harm, regardless of blood ties. It was a painful metamorphosis, but a necessary one. 1 year and 3 months after my parents sold my lake house, I sat on the dock of a different lake, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of orange and gold. The small cabin I had purchased in western Massachusetts 2 months earlier was nothing like my grandfather's place. More modern, less character, different waters. But it represented something important, a fresh start built on my terms. The decision to buy another lakefront property had not been about replacing what was lost. Nothing could replace the memories, the history, or the specific healing those New Hampshire waters had provided. This new place was about honoring what my grandfather had taught me, about finding peace in nature, about building something with my own hands, about determining what truly matters. Rachel sat beside me on the dock, her hand in mine, her presence, a testament to the authentic connections that had strengthened during this difficult chapter. We had discussed moving in together, taking the next step in a relationship built on mutual respect and clear communication. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, as the sun dipped below the tree line. "How losing everything I thought was permanent actually freed me to build something better," I replied. "A year ago, I could not have imagined feeling peaceful again. The journey to this moment had been neither quick nor easy. The initial months after the confrontation had been filled with doubt, with moments of grief so acute they took my breath away. There were nights I questioned my decision to sever ties so completely, mornings I woke, reaching for my phone to call my mother before remembering why I could not. I had learned that family estrangement carries its own unique form of grief, one without closure, without the finality of death, with the persistent awareness that the people who hurt you continue to exist in the world, perhaps just miles away. It was a grief, complicated by choice, by agency, by the knowledge that reconciliation remained theoretically possible, but practically unwise, without fundamental changes that might never come. Working through that grief had required professional help. The therapist I began seeing 3 months after the confrontation had helped me understand that my decision was not about punishment, but protection, a necessary boundary around a pattern of devaluation that had defined my family, relationships for 34 years. Forgiveness does not require reconciliation. She had reminded me during particularly difficult sessions. You can release the anger without resuming contact that causes harm. Gradually, the sharp edges of betrayal had softened. The hours spent dwelling on what had happened decreased. The nightmares about the lake house being destroyed stopped. In their place grew something unexpected: gratitude for the clarity the betrayal had provided. Without such an egregious breach of trust, I explained to Rachel, I might have continued accommodating their behavior indefinitely, making excuses, accepting less than I deserved. My new cabin had become the headquarters for a chosen family that expanded beyond Marcus and Rachel to include Aunt Linda and Cousin Jared, who visited monthly. Warren Fletcher, my grandfather's attorney, who had become a mentor and friend, colleagues who had become true friends, and even the new owners of my grandfather's lake house, who had invited me to fish from their dock whenever I wanted an offer, I had accepted twice. Finding unexpected healing in seeing children enjoying the place my grandfather had loved. Building new traditions had been essential to moving forward. The winter holidays, birthdays, and other milestone days that had always been defined by family gatherings required conscious reimagining. We created a Friendsgiving tradition, a summer solstice celebration at the new cabin, regular Sunday brunches with our inner circle. These rituals provided structure and connection without the undercurrent of tension that had characterized family gatherings. News about my parents and Ethan came sporadically through Aunt Linda, creating an unusual dynamic where I remained informed about major developments without direct contact. Ethan and Isabella had separated 8 months after their wedding, the marriage crumbling under financial stress and conflicting expectations. My parents had been forced to downsize, selling their Lexington home to help fund their retirement, after depleting savings to support Ethan through multiple failed ventures and the divorce proceedings that followed. There is a certain karmic justice to it all, Marcus had commented, when I shared these updates. They sacrificed your inheritance for a marriage that lasted less than a year. But I took no pleasure in their struggles. The outcome I had wanted was not their suffering but their recognition, a full acknowledgement of the pattern that had brought us to this point, and a commitment to change. That recognition had come only partially, in fragments, too little and too late to rebuild what had been broken. Warren Fletcher had sent me a handwritten letter 6 months after the confrontation, sharing perspectives he had withheld during the initial crisis. Your grandfather saw the dynamics in your family with perfect clarity, he wrote. He told me once that Richard and Diane would always provide for Ethan at anyone's expense, including their own. His decision to leave you the lake house was his attempt to ensure you received something of value from the family, knowing you would never be prioritized otherwise. He would be deeply saddened by what happened, but proud of how you have responded with dignity rather than destructive anger. That letter had provided a missing piece in my understanding, confirming that my grandfather's decision had been made with full awareness of the family patterns that ultimately led to its undoing. As the stars began appearing above our new lake, Rachel squeezed my hand. Your grandfather would be proud of who you have become through all this. I think so, I agreed. He always said the measure of a person is not what happens to them, but how they respond to it. The lessons of this painful chapter had crystallized over time into principles that now guided my life. True family is defined by respect and support, not blood relation. The people who treat you with consistent care earn the right to be called family in ways that biology alone never can. Boundaries are not punishments, but necessary protections. Setting and maintaining clear boundaries is an act of self-respect, not retaliation. Forgiveness does not require reconciliation. Releasing anger is necessary for healing, but resuming relationships that cause harm is not. Sometimes walking away is the only healthy choice. When patterns of behavior consistently undermine your worth, leaving may be the only viable path to peace. Material possessions, even those with deep sentimental value, cannot define your connection to those you have lost. My grandfather's values, wisdom, and love remained with me even after the lake house was gone. Building a life of integrity sometimes requires difficult choices. The temporarily comfortable path of acceptance and accommodation leads to long-term harm. As darkness fell completely over the lake, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in the span of a year. The betrayal that had initially felt like an ending had actually been a painful but necessary beginning, the catalyst for building a life aligned with my values, rather than distorted by others' expectations. "We should head inside," Rachel suggested as the temperature dropped. "I made that pasta you like." Walking back to the cabin windows glowing with warm light against the darkness, I felt a profound sense of having come full circle. Not to the same place I had been before that was impossible, but to a new understanding of home as something you create, rather than inherit, of family as those who value you, rather than those who share your name. The lake house was gone, but what it represented, peace, clarity, connection to what matters, had been reclaimed in new forms on my own terms. And in that reclamation was the greatest lesson of all, that sometimes what seems like an irrevocable loss becomes the foundation for something even more authentic and enduring. What about you? Have you ever had to make the difficult decision to walk away from toxic family dynamics for your own well-being? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about setting boundaries and finding peace. Remember that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself, even when it means letting go of what you thought was permanent. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the strength to build a life that honors your worth.